Finally, in the notion that somehow people in a place like Gaza are propelled to carry out suicide attacks because of religion, I think just, you wouldn't have to spend more than a few days in Gaza to see that Gaza is now virtually one. It's a prison. It's a walled-in prison. People can't travel out. There's severe malnutrition. I think the last figure is over 30%. People are living there on less than $1 a day. There isn't running water. People are sleeping 10 to a room. There's no employment, no educational system that functions. Of course, now we have a war between Fatah and Hamas on the streets of Gaza City. And these kids have no future. They have no prospects. And the only way they can affirm themselves in this society is through death. They at least know that if they're a shaheed, posters will be put up at their face on the wall. There'll be a huge funeral with several hundred people who fire guns behind them. And what has happened, and that's the tragedy of Oslo. The architects of Oslo, the peace agreement, understood that the engine to build a lasting peace between Israelis and Palestinians is economic. It is about giving Palestinians a stake in Israeli economy. It's about that possibility of Ahmed being able to buy a refrigerator and send his child to school. It's what broke the conflict in Northern Ireland. And the Israeli policies, both in the West Bank and Gaza, are becoming more draconian by the day. And of course, they're fueling the very kind of radicalism they're trying to break.
Okay. I need to address this issue of...
Yeah, look, I'll let you address it as lengthy way, but I just want to add a little bit to this. I happened to go to Gaza and the West Bank at the time of the Six-Day War, and I had been in Egypt at the tail end. And I think the consensus was, and I'm not an expert on the area, but the consensus was that the Palestinian population was the least religious of the Arab world. And that the feeling of the people there in Gaza and the West Bank was not driven in any stronger way by religion. And the PLO, as I said before, was basically a secular movement. As, for instance, in Iran, the movement that Mohammad Mossadegh was involved with, a nationalist movement in a country that later became more religious. Egypt, Nasser was a nationalist, later became more religious, and Muslim Brotherhood grew. So since the Quran had been written before all this, since the religion was present, how do you explain the rise of this religious feeling, if not in the terms that Chris just explained of desperation and reaction? Why did the PLO, for example, give way to Hamas? Why did these people in Gaza reject basically a secular model of the PLO and embrace Hamas, which was shown in elections and so forth? Why in Iran did they go from a Mossadegh to the Ayatollah? Why in Iraq did they go from basically a secular society to now a society where two major religious factions are contending? It wasn't that the Quran suddenly appeared. It wasn't that the Muslim religion suddenly appeared. It was external events which then caused people to turn to this religion.
Well, no, I think we have, I certainly think the lesson of Iraq is that we underestimated the role of religion. Religion was still a potent force all the time, even while it seemed to be a secular society from the outside. And Saddam Hussein, from the reports I've heard, was quite cognizant of the power of religion and was not nearly as secular as we have made him out to be in the way he marketed himself to his people. I think we are consistently erring on the side of assuming secularism that does not exist in the Muslim world. I need to deal with this charge of racism. It should be pretty easy to see that my criticism of Islam is not racist. First of all, it applies with equal felicity to white Muslims as to any other ethnicity. In some sense, it even applies more to somebody like John Walker Lind, a middle-class guy from Marin County who discovers the Quran and decides to go off and fight with the Taliban. It applies more, perhaps, to somebody like Adam Gadon, who comes from Orange County and goes off to be the PR guy for Al-Qaeda, because these guys don't have the alibi of having been brainwashed since infancy by their indigenous Muslim parents. They've adopted this. So there's nothing racist about my criticism of Islam. I am criticizing the logical consequences of certain ideas, and I'm certainly not limiting my criticism of religion to Islam. I just happen to one of the taboos I'm breaking quite consciously in my speaking and writing is I'm noticing that our religions are actually different. I mean, that they don't all teach the same thing, and where they do teach the same thing, they don't teach it equally well. I mean, we are not going to have a problem with Jain suicide bombers, no matter how mistreated Jains become in this world. The core principle of Jainism really is nonviolence. I mean, no matter how crazy you get as a Jain in terms of your religion, you're going to become less and less violent. I mean, there's no way you can justify any sort of violence by recourse to the principles of Jainism. To argue that the core principle of Islam is nonviolence is truly impossible. I mean, if anything, the core principle of Islam is jihad. It is convert, subjugate, or kill the infidel. I mean, the Quran and the Hadith do nothing so eloquently as demonize the infidel and talk about the imperative of spreading the faith. If you look at the historical example of Muhammad, he's rather a different character than Jesus. He is not a hippie who got crucified. He was a conquering general, and Muslims draw a lot from that example.
You know, Sam,
let me just add one more thing. Another piece that I find rather galling about this mode of apologizing for Islam, and certainly that raising the bogeyman of racism. One of my primary concerns, whenever I criticize Islam, one of the first things I say is that nobody is suffering under Islam more than Muslims. I mean, and certainly nobody's suffering more than Muslim women. And so to obfuscate, to call it racist to criticize this faith, which has I mean, the record of religion in general in terms of the treatment of women is horrifying. I mean, the great geniuses of the Abrahamic tradition thought about the riddle of womanhood, and they gave us this cult of virginity, the forced marriages, bride burning, honor killing. I mean, it is the fact that somebody like Ayaan Hirsi Ali, a Somali woman who became a Dutch parliamentarian and now is arguably one of the most hunted people on this planet because of her criticism of Islam, the idea that she has to deal with a multiculturalist criticism of her insensitivity to Islam, and this is a woman who has been, circumcised is a euphemism for it, hunted, had her collaborator butchered in the street in Amsterdam, and now she is a recipient of the same kind of criticism. It is obscurantism. Our religions are different.
well, if I had a Hebrew Bible here, I could read you passages that are just as distasteful.
I quote them in my book.
So the notion that somehow, because those passages, there are hateful passages in the Quran, which they are, is used as a tool to demonize Islam, holds no more validity than demonizing Judaism. I mean, those passages are in both books. And I think that the difference is, and this is, I'm just going to read a couple sentences from your book, where you talk about how to deal with the Islamic world. It's not a matter merely of condemning their religion. You write, it seems all but certain that some form of benign dictatorship will generally be necessary to bridge the gap. But benignity is the key, and if it cannot emerge from within a state, it must be imposed from without. The means of such imposition are necessarily crude. They amount to economic isolation, military intervention, whether open or covert, or some combination of both. While this may seem an exceedingly arrogant doctrine to espouse, it appears we have no alternatives. We cannot wait for weapons of mass destruction to dribble out of the former Soviet Union, to pick only one horrible possibility and into the hands of fanatics. What you're doing is using this demonization of Islam to justify the intervention and occupation of Muslim countries. And as we can see from Iraq, it's not a good idea.